That's it.
Shah, any luck?
Naveen, stop recording.
Yes.
Facebook, which link? Where is the link in Facebook? That is,
I've
showing the
sent
live.
you. I'll send you in your WhatsApp also.
They don't send me in my WhatsApp. Send me on my Facebook. My Facebook is kept open just for that reason.
Okay. Okay.
Where am I?
Just a minute.
Let me just check my sound.
Doing it right now.
Because I need to be able to share.
Can you send it on the WHF group with the links and everything? Right.
Well, it's that one what you sent.
It's only the picture, but in
the Zoom is yeah.
Tushar, can you also do one thing?
Yes.
Tushar, can you also
Yes.
do one thing? See, my page allows people to put up posts. So once you get the link, instead of tagging me, straight away go to Arindam Mukherjee and write a
I'll
message.
send you as a message.
And no, don't send me as a message. Go and paste it on my page.
Okay. Okay.
Don't send me as a message
page,
because then I have to extract that message back and put it back on
I'm
my
at your
page.
page.
একদম গিয়ে পাতি পোস্ট করে দে just put
Write
it on my
something to
page.
Arindam ওইখানে তো
Bas. Absolutely. Just go and post it on my page. In that case, people can see and then I'll be able to log out because my screen is taking up
Perfect.
too much of yeah.
check
Chalo.
if it is done.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
don't forget to mute all your phones because we don't want the phone ringing whilst
Yeah,
we
phones muted. Nothing to worry.
Basically, phone mustn't ring.
Muted. I have to mute.
Okay, do I look fine there? Because I don't see myself in this thing here.
Yeah, very fun. So because of the white, it's. I was going to ask if I want to do powder.
I don't do all that.
The gray handsome actually. The red is very good.
So now it's on mute is off. Are we ready to go to main screen? Because it's now 1 minute to 4 p.m.
Don't forget now.
What happened to that packet?
Our first stream as much as
Yeah. How's this packet?
no.
Lakshman, can you put the main screen on and so get off the second screen?
It's not here. And that red one you don't want to use.
No, this one just fits your shirts nicely when it's ironed inside.
Just
But leave it for now,
No, I
but you
can't
must
This is the technique.
let the dye go on the shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to put that. Where's that packet you gave me? Give me that red bag. I'll give you that.
What red bag?
Your computer bag.
Laxbhai, you have to go mute.
What are you talking about?
To put that clothes in.
Lux is now on mute. Please put the video on. It's now 4 p.m.
I want to put the clothes.
What red bag?
Yeah. Anything to put this clothes inside.
To take it?
Sir, live has been started. The video is playing. 20 seconds is remaining more.
Can you make another load for this? Not immediately, another day.
Take it with you.
But it is going into the laundry.
So, oh, you mean you want me to wash it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Just leave it.
But it mustn't.
Oh, you never start the washing machine.
When you have enough like shirts and all, then wash it. But now that one is all mixed up.
Leave it there.
Yeah, I can't take that into the laundry, Mike,
No, that'll be stupid.
because
I wish you'd started that washing machine, you know.
so many things I was doing in one. And wait, let me go out first. Go.
Sir, Laksar, please unmute yourself.
I don't know. Lux, you have to unmute yourself.
Can I start again? The Mumbai terror attack, 9/11, and various other incidences of terrorist attacks worldwide have left us traumatized and appalled that in this modern 21st century, there are those that resort to what can be described as savage and primitive practices. I'm your host, Laks Maharaj, and on behalf of Indians in Africa, welcome you to this program where we explore two topics: the politics of terror and why Indic civilizations will survive such terror. We have two speakers, Arinda Mukherjee and Professor Anand Singh, that will each present the topics. As an interlude between the speakers, I will play a video that is a collection of media from Mozambique, Denmark, Kenya, with questions to both our speakers. As a disclaimer, please note you are welcome that the views of myself or that of speakers do not represent those of Indians in Africa. For our viewers, please submit questions on Facebook, which will be moderated before I raise your questions in the panel session. Our first speaker is Arinda Mukherjee, who is an author, speaker, geopolitical analyst, enthusiast, and is on a mission to build socio-political awareness amongst youth. Based on his work, his curiosity for history and international politics, I've found him to quickly grasp the near future impact of many events in the international arena. Over to you, Mr. Mukherjee. Mr. Mukherjee, you are on mute.
Thank you, Lux. Good evening and namaste to all the viewers who've tuned in, watching this show. It's an honor to be a part of this group. It's a special day for me. It's a special 26/11 is a special day where I would be using 26/11 as a point of reference to go back and try and trace the politics of contemporary terrorism. So couple of things before I start. I would be trying to trace events that sort of transformed, that sort of mutated the global landscape. And I would try a little bit to talk about why the West fails to grasp the picture. There are 2 points over here which I would want to make. One is that I would be using the word Islamize, Islamization, Islamized, Islamizing, so on and so forth. When I use that word, that the general understanding of the word, that it is the politics of using Islam as a tool for outward access and control. So, you know, if I am using an ideology or a philosophy to sort of conquer my inner demons, to sort of conquer my inner negativities, that's being spiritual. And if I'm using that same ideology or religion or idea or philosophy for outward access and control, access to money, access to control, controlling people, controlling geostrategies, territories for the sake of it, that becomes political. So Islamization is generally used in that sense. I would also be using the word jihad quite a few often. Number of times jihad when I use would be used in the lower definition of jihad, which is used of political balance to further a socio-political or a religious agenda. There is also another disclaimer which I would want to make here is that I am going to try and keep everything within 20 minutes. That's a tall order because this kind of a topic needs at least 45 minutes to 1 hour, but I'll try to quickly summarize what has been happening and how we can look into the politics of terrorism. Why 2611 is an important reference point? To those that know, 2611 is the first time where Fidayeen-style attacks were carried outside of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, if you want to understand Fidayeen attack in details, you have to understand the modus operandi of Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jamaat-ud-Dawa. I would ask you all to read up if you're interested. So it is not just Fidayeen-style attack on outside Jammu and Kashmir. It was Fidayeen-style attack on civilians outside Jammu and Kashmir. And not just that. This was not just 3-4 guys who were hitting a police station or an army barrack. This was a group of 10 people that had segregated themselves into 5 or 6 groups, and then they had targeted about 13 symbols of India's emergence into India's ascent into the global stage. They were trying to hit India's economic cloud. So what they did was they picked up the financial capital of India and they picked up the business district of the financial capital of India. And they were taking down targets like Taj. They were taking down targets like Chabad House. They were targeting the Jews. They were targeting the white Westerners, and they were targeting civilians. So we all know that this kind of an event doesn't take birth in vacuum. And thanks to the brave constable called Tukaram Ombole who caught Ajmal Kasab, we now know that Pakistan and ISI and Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Hafiz Saeed, etc. were the masterminds behind it. There was a section of Indian liberal, most notably Digvijay Singh and all, that tried to whitewash it, calling it RSS terror and all. But thanks to Tukaram Ombole, we right now stand at a point in time where we know who are responsible for it. Having said that, there are trails. I mean, is it just Pakistan? No, there are trails that sort of take us back in time. And for that, we have to move into 70s and 80s and try to understand a couple of events that kind of transform this Eurasian landscape. Now, before I start, to the millennials and to the young guys, please don't get bored with me thinking that this guy is going to take us back by 50, 60 years. Oh my God, I'm not going to dwell much on there. That's a promise. But it's important, as I said, that if you want to trace the beginnings of contemporary terrorism, political terrorism, you'll have to understand. And the beginnings sort of take me back to the year 1979, which is perhaps the most important year in the past, 50, 60 years that you would come across. One of the most important year, other being the year when Cold War was finally officially over. What happened in 1979 is the first thing is that there was an Islamic revolution in Iran. Now, we don't, in subcontinent here, we don't much care about Islamic revolution in Iran because it didn't directly affect us, but it sure indirectly affected us, as we would understand. So Iran was a puppet state of the West, West meaning United States, United Kingdom, France, etc., etc. So they had a puppet called Shah who was there, who was leading the country. He had gone out somewhere and Ayatollah Khomeini took power. So this Islamic revolution of Iran, what happened as a result of that is, there were 3 big-time oil-producing states in the Middle East. So one was Saudi Arabia, one was Iran, and one was Iraq. The moment the Islamic Revolution happened, and there was a nationalization of Iranian oil back in the 1950s, Iran fell off the radar of the oil-producing countries that West was dependent upon. What happened is the market reacted. So although there was a drop of 4%, but the oil prices shot up through the roof. Second point, what happened is at the end of 79, I think it was in 80, when Iraq decided to attack Iran because they saw that Iran was weak, so let us attack Iran. What happened is then out of the 3 oil producing countries, you had 2 countries that were fighting with each other now. So all in all, another 7% oil drop, the oil production dropped by 11% and oil prices quadrupled. Saudi Arabia, the lone country which was stable then, which was already floating on oil and floating on money, which was like rich beyond your mind wildest dream, suddenly got all the more richer. So two things that happened: Islamic Revolution, oil prices shooting through the roof. The third thing that happened was that in 1979, the Mecca Masjid, which was the end of 1979, Mecca Masjid, which is the holiest shrine of Islam, was attacked. The first reaction was that, you know, the Shia Iranians have attacked. So they have taken over the country. Now they were trying to take over our holy shrines. But then what happened is, as things turned out, that this was not an Iranian guy that attacked, a group of Iranian guy, not a group of Iranian guy that attacked. This was not a group of Shias that attacked. This was a group of Wahhabi Sunni Muslims that attacked the masjid and killed people. And Wahhabism is pretty much, Sunni Wahhabism is pretty much the bedrock of Saudi Arabian landscape. So these are Saudi guys, Sunni Wahhabi guys who had attacked the masjid. The monarch of Saudi Arabia was going to react in a particular way, which we are going to talk about. The fourth thing that happened in 1979 was Soviet Union walked into Afghanistan. Now, there is an incredibly good book called Ghost War by Steve Cole. Those who are interested, you can read that. It is basically, we don't have time for that. Basically, to cut a long story short, United States suffered an embarrassing defeat in Vietnam. So ever since then, they were trying to give a Soviet Union their Vietnam. They sort of lay down the trap, and the lured Soviet Union in. Soviet Union responded. They walked into Afghanistan, and the rest, you know what happened. What happened, interestingly, is that most of all of these things saw Pakistan as a beneficiary. And that's how Pakistan comes into the picture. So these are the 4 points in 79. I'll quickly take you to what happened as a result of that. So when Saudi Arabia was alarmed, because, you know, there's a Shia government which is in power just in the neighborhood of this, in neighboring Iran. Now, Middle East has an interesting mix of people. While we know that there's a Sunni Muslims that are in majority around the rest of the world, from Morocco to Indonesia, Middle East has got a significant chunk of Shia population in places that matter. So Bahrain is Shia. The oil fields of Saudi Arabia, where the main oil is, that's Shia population. Iran is Shia. Iraq has got a significant amount of Shia population. Lebanon has got Shia population, so on and so forth. So there was this alarm within Saudi Arabia, which suddenly then realized that we need to proliferate, Wahhabism. We need to proliferate Sunni Wahhabism. They were already sitting on a lot of money. They started pumping money to any Islamic nations, any institutions, any madrasas that were willing to carry out, pacification of the Sunni Muslim population. This is 1980s that we are talking about. And if you've grown up in the subcontinent, 1980s is the time you would have noticed that, Urdu terms like Khuda Hafiz sort of started getting changed, started getting replaced by a more Arabic term of Allah Hafiz, or Ramzan Mubarak started getting changed and it became Ramadan Kareem. So these were cultural appropriation. This were like Urdu words being supplanted by Arabic words. So what happened was then there was an ossification of culture, there was an ossification of dress code, there was an ossification of rituals. And this was the time, 80s and 90s is the time when Saudi Arabian money that sort of poured around all the madrasas that you could see in the Sunni world gradually started ossifying the Sunni world. Strangely, what happened is West was a party to all of this. United States knew about all of this. United States chose to do nothing. Why? Because communism was considered the main enemy, and communism was showing its ambitions in Middle East. And USSR was there. There was a Cold War going on. They chose to look the other way. Like, it's your money. You do whatever you want to do with your money. Our only target is to counter communism. So it went on unnoticed, and the West didn't do anything about it. Now comes Pakistan. What is the role of Pakistan? You see, I have put the picture of two people of Pakistan. One is Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and one is Ziaul Haq. And these are the two guys that sort of catalyzed Pakistan into what it is today. The creation of Pakistan, I would ask you to read this book by M.J. Akbar called The Tinderbox. Okay, significant chunk of the creation of Pakistan has been brilliantly captured over here. Let me put this book down. Pakistan, M.J. Akbar thinks, is the result of Shah Waliullah's theory of distance. Now, Waliullah, the picture on the slide that you see, was a man who was a cleric. He was alive during the time when Mughal Empire was crumbling. Nadir Shah was attacking. Nadir Shah had taken away Peacock Throne, had sort of destroyed Delhi, and then taken. There was Chhatrapati Shivaji. Colonial powers were sort of rearing their head. Punjab was stirring. He lived during a very bad time. And the cumulative of his experience was very bad. So he realized, or in his mind, he thought that, Sunni Islam has been polluted because we are in touch with Shias, we are in touch with the Hindus and Buddhists and so on and so forth. So the only way to keep your religion pure is to go back to being the way it was pure, is to go back and create a distance from all the Shias and the Buddhists and the Hindus that are there. So theory of distance is something like that. I have just tried to cover it in 2 minutes. I would suggest you please read the book read the book Tinderbox by M.J. Akbar. So all in all, Pakistan's reason for creation was like, the lost glory of 500 years of Turko-Uzbek rule, the Mughal rule, that's suddenly gone. There's this fear of disinheritance, there's this fear of loss, there's fear of a lot of things. And that sort of created an artificial construct called Pakistan. Of course, they had to have an institutional help. Without institutional help, this was not possible. Now, institutional help came in the shape of British East India Company, the United Kingdom government. United Kingdom government had this fetish to, throw a spanner into Russia's expansion plan in Central Asia. So Russia was getting very close to the warm water ports of Karachi and Gwadar. So that is where Afghanistan had to be carved. They wanted to be present in Pakistan after 1945. They never realized that 1945 would mark an end. The Second World War would mark an end of the colonial quest. They thought post 1945 we would be in Pakistan. We would stop Soviet Union at one end, and we would rule the subcontinent at the other end. So they shifted their military headquarters and all to Pakistan. So these are the core reasons why Pakistan was created. The issue is, the interesting thing is that, the core concept of Pakistan was based on a very negative sense of, as I said, disinheritance and loss and fear and all. And somehow, interestingly, that kept on continuing. First, they lost Kashmir. Kashmir decided to come back, stay with India. The moment they lost Kashmir, now this is not being talked about. People who know, for example, you can read Brahmachalani. Brahmachalani has got loads of essays on that. One of the main reasons, the optics is that Kashmir is Muslim, so we want it. But the core reason why they want Kashmir is because of the water sources. Indus originated in Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh region. Indus's tributaries originate there. Pakistan is irrigated through all the distributaries. Whoever controls water has got an upper hand. And in the coming future, if last century was a war over petroleum, over hydrocarbon, this century is going to be a war over water. And I would once again suggest you read a Brahmachalani for that. So they lost their water sources. Then there was 1971, Bangladesh got away. So, territorial loss, water sources lost, martial loss. They tried to, they waged war against India in 48 and 65 and 71 and 99. They lost all of the war. And what was irritating to them was that India was prospering, not great shakes, but India was doing reasonably well within reasonable limits at the same time, because these two nations were created at the same time that way. What happened? When you're losing, there is a tendency to try and seek solace somewhere. So that was when Muhammad Ali Jinnah's secular Pakistan started getting ossified. There was Ayub Khan who was there, and Ayub Khan came in as the premier of the state, and he was held responsible for the war against India in 1965. But not many people know that it was Bhutto that needled Ayub Khan to fight India. Ayub Khan was a generally secular guy. He had fair secular credentials, not to the not to the level of Muhammad Ali Jinnah maybe, but he was a secular guy. Bhutto was one of the youngest ministers in his cabinet, and he said, let's fight India. China has defeated India in 62. This is a good time. 65, they tried to fight us. What happened is that Indian army ended in Lahore. So anyway, Ayub Khan went out, Bhutto came in, and Bhutto and Ziaul Haq are the two guys that sort of Islamized this country. So if I think of Bhutto was the elite Islamizing guy. He sort of Islamized the institutions. And Zia was the mass Islamizing guy. What he did was he visualized that the only way to, politicize Islam in Pakistan is to Islamize the lowest of the rung of the society. So what Bhutto did with the institutions, Ziaul Haq did with the entire population of Pakistan. It helps that Ziaul Haq was the president at the time. I think he was in 1978 to 1988, 10 years he was president. 78, he became the president. 79, USSR walked into Afghanistan. So suddenly he had money from Saudi Arabia, he had money from CIA, he had money from everywhere. So he was having a great time fighting, getting his jihadists to fight in Afghanistan. He was having a great time needling Kashmir. What has happened today is that, all this adrenaline high of fighting and terror games and war games and this and that and strategic depth has now kind of was shadowing the economic downfall of Pakistan, the descent into chaos of Pakistan. Now Pakistan's economy is so bad that from macro level it's come down to micro level. Industries don't run, factories don't run, there's power cut, things are so bad that, internet trolls have started taking out memes of their leaders asking for money from different countries and different institutions. So there was a series of tactical progress which they thought were making good, but then it was masking a collective descent into chaos. And there is a great book, there are two great books. One book I would suggest is Ahmed Rashid's Descent into Chaos. If interested, you can read it. Another book that I would suggest is Frontline Pakistan by Zahid Hussain. If you want, you can read it. So these are the two books that would provide a lot of information about Pakistan. Now, what happened is at the end of the Afghanistan war, 1989, when Afghan war got over, and when Soviet Union crumbled after that, the West took on to celebrating the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama wrote. And the West was celebrating from 1990 to 2000 was a decade when West was celebrating their win on communism, on evil communists. What they did not notice was that 1993 there was a World Trade Center bombing. There was this Somalia affair with the Black Hawk. There was Paris train bombing. There was Madrid's train bombing. There was Bombay blast. Suddenly what happened was then 2001, when 9/11 happened, they woke up and they realized that, this 1979 to 89, when they had got all these hundreds and thousands of mujahideens and jihadists from all around, from Morocco to Yemen, from Bosnia to Indonesia, all people, assembled in Afghanistan and Pakistan and fighting the infidels, the communists and all. 1989, when the Soviet Union walked out, suddenly there was no war to fight there. So these people took 10 years' time and took the war out to the rest of the world, when West was celebrating its win over communism. So if you look at the map in the background, it's a map of Europe, and this map tracks the spot of terror activities between 1990 and 2010. So suddenly the war which was being fought in an Afghanistan theater, and there were thousands and hundreds and thousands of guys that suddenly got, liquefied, because there were a lot of reasons behind that. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that. The name of this slide is Liquid Jihad. If you are interested, I have written an essay in details titled the same, Liquid Jihad. You can Google up and you can read. It was basically the effect of Liquid Jihad started coming up in 2001, 2002 as 9/11, and 26/11 is also a result of Liquid Jihad, where there were no institutions basically. So earlier on, during 70s and 80s, there were institutions. Pakistan was an institution. Saudi Arabia was an institution. After Osama bin Laden, there was no institutions. Money went underground. Internet proliferated. 600 TV channels started showing, you could log on to YouTube and you could build a bomb. So there was no head to cut off. It was a global conglomerate. Terrorist attacks could happen anywhere. Anyone with a hint of an affiliation and some money could find out weapons and go and hit a bus or go and shoot a few people. That's the era of Liquid Jihad, started from 1990, and West was caught sleeping. Now, why was the West clueless? So you see, the Mecca attack happened. Saudi Arabia was caught sleeping. Saudi Arabia was clueless. They had grown soft, even though the monarch had a Wahhabi clergy by his side. Still, there were Wahhabi guys who thought that they were soft, so they attacked. But it is not that West did not know. When Saudi Arabia was trying to sponsor the Sunni radicalism, West was there. They said yes to that. When Ziaul Haq was trying to arm and fund the Mujahideen, West was there. In fact, they encouraged him to do that. Okay, Brzezinski went ahead and said that, what was more important to you, that the end of Soviet Union or a few stirred of Muslims. So it's not that they did not know. The fact is that they never thought that it could turn on in such a massive way on back to them. Now, in the last phase of this presentation, I'm going to try and understand why is this cluelessness of the West. Essentially, what we are looking at is modern West is a de-religionized society. They have grown organically since medieval ages. During the 15th or the 14th century, 15th or the 16th century, I believe there was a separation of state and church. So ever since then, they have grown into it for 500, 600 years. They have sort of de-religionized themselves. Whereas in Islam, there has been no separation of state and church. You know, Moses died before reaching promised land. Jesus could never be very successful during the time when he was alive. It was his disciples that sort of spread Christianity far and wide. But Muhammad, on the other hand, ruled as a king. He ruled as a religious leader. He was a triumphant leader. He won wherever he went. So in Islam, there is no such confusion. There's no such dichotomy. For them, religion and state and church and everything is one. So that's the only one identity that unites. So there you find a massive difference. So you have a Western society which is de-religionized. You have an Islamic society which is deeply religious. Let's look at the next difference. 17 something, I think, industrial revolution touched Great Britain. Soon Europe, the entire Europe got industrialized, and industrial revolution touched everywhere. So from 17 something to 20 something, about 300 years of living in an industrial society. And when I talk about industrialization, I'm not talking about UAE getting expat workers to work as construction workers. I'm talking about industrial revolution touching every section of the West. So 300 years of industrial mindset, 500 years of de-religionized mindset. We are essentially looking at somebody, a group of people who are at their cellular level being brought organically into de-religionized and an industrial mindset. On the other hand, Islamic nations are pretty pre-industrial and pastoral and nomadic in their nature. The example that I took of Saudi Arabia, of United Arab Emirates, even the advanced countries, like the KSAs, the Saudi Arabias and the United Arab Emirates, which they are great buildings and first world comfort, most of their workers are expat. So from the top management to the middle management to the construction workers, everybody is an expat. So if I am an average Filipino who's, let's say, working in Dubai, I would keep my mouth shut and I would earn my money and I would try to make the most that I can as far as earning is concerned. And when it's time for me, I would go back home. I am not a part of the societal fabric of the society. I am not going to concern myself to be what is going to happen to UAE and how can that society progress. So that kind of a mindset is not there. So what you are essentially seeing when a person from an Islamic society drives his Dodge Charger or his Ferrari or moves into a building, a shopping mall, which is all glitz and glam, he is trying to exploit the results of centuries of industrialization and religionization of a civilian. He's trying to exploit the collective constructive intelligence that is the result, that has given him such a result, without ever being a part of it. He can never be a part of it because it is not him. He also knows that, he or she also knows that. So we are looking at, while West's prime concentration, because they are de-religionized, because they're industrial mindset. Of course, post-industrial, somebody can argue about being post-industrial, but I say that 21st century is only the beginning. It'll take us another 2 or 3 decades before we get post-industrial mindset. So what we are looking at is industrial mindset, whose prime consideration is in the trade routes and markets, and which considers itself to be a capitalist society, which is again an industrial ideology, is trying to fight communism, which is again an industrial ideology. And Islam's prime consideration is, either Islam or it is the rest of us. So what we are essentially looking at when we're talking about 9/11, when we talk about events like 26/11, when we talk about Charlie Hebdo, when we talk about London bombings, Madrid bombings, call it what, we're essentially looking at a clash of industrial and pre-industrial mindset, and the contemporary beginnings of which can be traced back to 1979. So I hope I've been very fast. I know, I hope I could get some more time, but that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for being with me. Namaste. Over to you, Lux.
Thank you, Mr. Mukherjee, for that insightful view into the politics of terror. In fact, not many are aware of the role of international politics in the history of terror. I'm glad that you are bringing awareness of these various facets, in particular to our younger generations. Given that we are now in the space era, preparing to travel to other planets, I'm dismayed to see that there are those that seem not to have evolved, remain in a medieval mindset, you could say, and intent on, as you said, pre-industrial thinking philosophy. That said, we now have a video capturing incidences reported in Denmark, Nigeria, Paris, Mozambique, and Kenya. Credits are to Al Jazeera, BBC, Germany's DW News, HBO, and ABC News. Let us view some of these news extracts. Technical.
Sir, Anand sir, please share your PPT. Share your screen.
Since 2017. Well, our correspondent Adrian Creech was in Mozambique before the fighting began and following the events from Cape Town.
Anand sir.
What more can you tell us about the attack at this point?
Yeah, okay, I'm on the screen.
At this point, fights are still seeming
Sir,
to be
Manish sir.
going. The city is besieged by the Islamists.
Anandji, let's share the screen now.
Okay, so now I am on share screen. And what do I do next?
Select the
Share.
presentation which you have. Yeah, very good. Yes, go to your first slide. Yeah, we can see your screen. Go to your. Yeah.
Okay, so go to my screen. Oh, come on.
Just press the arrow button and go to the first page up. Page.
Where? Go
Yeah,
to
you can
open book.
and on the left, we have got it there. Yeah, everything is there. Yeah, the left one. Left. Yeah, that one. Just keep on clicking it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one more. One more, and if you will go to the. Yes, good. Well done. Yeah.
That's the right one?
Yeah.
I cannot see where what's happening. So how do I know when the video is finished?
Just on the live technician, and we are watching, and so it's still going.
Manish, am I right so far?
Yeah, everything right, Anandji. Once Alex says, then you can continue. Yeah.
Okay, let me know when it finishes because I don't see it here. I just see Professor Anand's screen.
Which is not so unlikely at this point. This is going to be.
Please switch on your video, sir. Anand sir.
DW's Adrian Creech reporting for us. Thank you.
I'm fine. I couldn't.
The camp for displaced people.
Anandji, video switch on.
It has been hoped to get back balanced. Like everyone.
Yeah,
okay.
Well done.
I can see everything.
Live technician, am I the only one who's not hearing it? It seems to be muted.
Can I begin?
Yeah, ma'am.
They were harvesting rice. Some were shot, others had their throats cut.
There were 6 of
More
us in the
5
bush.
minutes, man.
Then we headed back into the village. We were shocked when we got there. We found their bodies, and that was where the main killings took place. Then we went through a nearby village called Gudo. We met so many people fleeing from our village without knowing where they were going. A huge amount of harvested rice was set on fire.
It's the most violent attack on civilians in Borno State this year. The region in northeastern Nigeria has been gripped by a jihadist insurgency.
I don't see the live screen.
Give an insight into the behavior of the Al-Shabaab gunmen. They are often seen walking calmly through the corridors, a chilling contrast to the panicked shoppers. Gunfire can clearly be seen here. One attacker takes the time to pray as two others sit by. At one point, we see a woman with small children. She seems to be limping, followed by what appears to be an injured young girl, and behind them a gunman, waving them on to keep walking. The moment of panic is also seen here in the cafe. It's 12:35 in the afternoon. Then at 1:46, help has arrived. Two armed men seem to be figuring out how to proceed. A muted person lies by the counter. They are eerie images showing the sheer terror people had to endure and the brutality of the attack. One man is seen in these images being shot at point blank range, which we will not show. The footage shows only 4 gunmen, such a small number to have killed so many.
Good morning, Martha. Today it is Copenhagen's turn to reckon with the aftermath of terror. We are here at the site of the first of the attacks yesterday afternoon. Right back there, you can see the bullet-riddled glass, the cafe where this began. Danish security had been on high alert, but this attack came without warning. Its apparent targets, however, were grimly familiar: a cartoonist and a synagogue.
For hours, this city was gripped by terror. It began here at around 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon at this Copenhagen cafe. The first target, a gunman opening fire, firing 40 rounds. Police on the scene firing back. Inside, a panel discussion on art, blasphemy, and freedom of expression. Listen as the horror unfolds.
Why do we still say but when we...
The host, Lars Vilks, he's a Swedish cartoonist, and he's on an Al-Qaeda hit list for drawing the Prophet Muhammad. Vilks, whose bodyguards rushed him into the cafe's kitchen, survived, but a 55-year-old man attending the event was killed.
I'm not sure how many shots, but I'd say I told you 30 shots, and people panicked, of course, and ran to the doors. Other people were hiding behind tables they had turned over.
Police launched a nationwide manhunt, releasing this image of a suspect who fled in a stolen car. And then just after midnight, another shooting spree. This one
Sir, more 40 seconds.
3 people shot, 1 person killed, 2 police officers wounded, and the gunman fleeing on foot. A few hours later, a shootout not far away. Danish police apparently lying in wait for a suspect, and when he arrived, killing him in an exchange of gunfire. Authorities say they believe he was the gunman in both of the early shootings.
15 seconds to go, sir.
Video from last
After
night.
15 seconds, you can go direct live. Okay?
Arabic looking, 25 to
10,
30 years
count
old,
down 10.
armed with
Okay. These news clips certainly create a bleak picture of suffering, horror, death, and destruction faced by many innocent civilians. The world faces terrorism and is today also battling with COVID. These challenges we as a human race face seems very much caused by our own actions, ideologies, and malicious intents. Given that many civilizations such as Mayans have disappeared, let us understand why Indic civilizations will survive such terror. Now, our next speaker is Professor Anand Singh, who is a professor of anthropology at the School of Social Sciences, UKZN in South Africa. Professor Singh has delivered various papers and research into the Indian diaspora, political anthropology, and the anthropology of development. Simply put, for all our viewers, anthropology is the study of what makes us human. Professor Anand will explore the topic of why Indic civilizations will survive such terror. Over to you, Professor Anand.
Thank you, Lux. Can you hear me? No.
Yes. Unmute.
Okay. Thank you very much. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Thank you. The videos that we've just seen now forces us to look at the issue of terrorism in at least two contexts. One is the terrorism that is experienced in so many different parts of the world under the contemporary conditions that we are living, but abetted and supported by a whole range of forces that are bent on destroying whatever we possibly have in this world in all its glory and diversity that we live with. The other context is one closer to home, especially with respect to who we are as people of Indian origin. In India, the issue has always been about not just visiting the country, but to rape, to loot, and to plunder for the sake of personal gain, as well as countries enriching themselves at the expense of what Indians have always produced. Now, my colleague who presented a moment earlier, Mr. Arindam Mukherjee, raised a very pertinent question with regard to why is it that India is facing so much of terrorism? One of the explanations is that if India comes together and is able to sort out its internal problems and create unity among themselves, the rest of the world will most likely be left behind. And those people who are following what India's history has been, what progress India has made indigenously, how, for instance, they created their own nuclear program, how they've entered the world once they've opened their economy into information technology. They worked such wonders to the point of virtually dominating two spheres that most of the countries in the world are yet to come by with. Now, this brings us to something that is at the core of what terrorism is all about. It is essentially a clash of civilizations and the remaking of a world order. Now, this situation is something that forces us to think and to bring to focus a range of issues that we need to view in order to assess what we are facing currently and what we are yet to face in time to come. This fantastic book written by Samuel P. Huntington on a clash of civilizations and the remaking of the world order is really about the fall of socialism and communism. But he made one very important prediction when he first published the book, and that was that Islam was going to replace socialism and communism, which had actually lost its stranglehold in many of the countries that it tried to dominate, and to replace capitalist countries in the areas where they dominated. It is a classic publication which came out in 2007 on international relations, and it remains as one of the most important books on foreign affairs. Now, Huntington provides us with a persuasive analysis that forces us to look at the forces that drive global politics, and which ensures that we try to examine the role of one of the most dominant countries in the world today, and that is the USA. Perhaps understanding this, since the USA still remains the most powerful country on the planet to date, and it's going to be that way for a while to come. Although many people do tend to think that China is actually going to supersede the United States. It is hand in glove with many of the Islamic countries, particularly Pakistan, trying to dominate one of its most competitive forces, which happens to share a border with it, and that is India. The best they could possibly do is continue to destabilize India in order to ensure their own progress. Now, we take a step back to almost 20 years ago, the 9/11 attacks and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which have demonstrated the threat of civilizations, but which have also shown how vital international cross-civilization cooperation is to restoring peace in this world. Now, what is important about the use of such language, the threat of civilizations, and the importance of international cross-civilization, is that barely 100 years ago, when the humanities and social sciences was just emerging, and it served as a very important prop to colonialism, those countries which we are now referring to as civilization have actually been labeled as barbaric and as savage. The terminology has changed over the last 100 years to the extent that people are now beginning to get that recognition that they were denied for most of the period in the colonial era. As ideological distinctions among nations have been replaced by cultural differences, world politics has been reconfigured. At the time of the 9/11 attacks in New York, there was one kind of world order being created. Now with the pandemic, both with China and the United States being blamed for it, there is a new world order that's going to replace what emerged in 2001. Across the globe, new conflicts and new cooperation have replaced the old order of the Cold War era. Now, the clash of civilizations and the remaking of world order explains how the population explosion in Muslim countries, especially in Muslim countries, and the economic rise of East Asia are actually changing global politics. Now, what is important here for us to remember, especially in terms of this statement, is that generally the world at the moment is actually experiencing a negative population growth. But in Muslim countries, the population growth is at a very high positive. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, what we are also seeing is that since the Industrial Revolution in Western Europe, nothing significant has been invented by Western countries to date. Most of the inventions and issues of economic importance and creativity are actually emanating from South Asia and East Asia. These developments challenge Western dominance. They promote opposition to supposedly universal Western ideals, and they intensify inter-civilization conflict over such issues as nuclear proliferation, immigration, human rights, and democracy. Now, these are the words of the ex-National Security Advisor during the Jimmy Carter era of 1977 to 1981, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Now, if you listen to his words, the crux of his statement here lies in his allegation of supposedly universal Western ideals. When people at the level at which Brzezinski operated use words such as supposedly universal. It is a virtual, if not a direct admission of American values being called into question. They're not as universal as they wish it to be, yet they continue to refer to themselves as the so-called free world, and everybody else has to learn from them, but largely as it happens to suit them. Now, the lessons that we've learned from this situation raises an important question. What lessons do such words convey to us in a world that is so divided by political and religious ideologies? Firstly, that even the allegedly most progressive countries with already very progressive constitutions cannot persuade the rest of the world that their internal and foreign policies are actually based on fairness, that they have the will to peacefully coexist, and above all, to help other nations build and progress independently. Arindam Mukherjee just pointed out, for instance, the West, particularly to the leadership of the United States, involvement in so many different countries on the one hand. And on the other hand, Islamic State's involvement on terror activities in the states that they oppose. Now, what happened as a result of all of this? The key to world peace, according to Brzezinski, rightfully recognizes it is to recognize the use of multi-civilizational existences in varying parts of the world. All of a sudden, countries such as India and the Hindus that went out to work all over the world as indentured laborers, which was really, for most of the time, nothing more than another form of slavery, these so-called backward, myopic-looking people have been recognized for the civilized values that they now imbibe, or that they've always imbibed. Now, while the idea is laudable indeed, it fails to recognize issues that are intrinsic to the fundamental problems in the ideologies that this world now has. In Western countries, commercially and industrially, that are essentially bound by their constitutions, which apply strictly to the internal conditions of their states. Whatever is stated about them and them as role models becomes extremely difficult for them to actually persuade other countries that their levels of constitutionalism is really persuasive and would be able to win the hearts and minds of people in developing countries. The West, as we can see right now, is actually failing, and they are struggling in many ways to keep that hegemonic position that they've enjoyed over the last several hundred years. It is fast and very swiftly coming to an end. But it is greed through economic want that they have to recognize countries such as India and China for the simple reason that those big populations constitute huge markets. And what finances they can eke out of those countries is what actually becomes their priority now, more than the constitutional values of the so-called free world. In many ways, the hypocrisy of the West is seen in the press and in radio and in the media and social media and the control of all of these. Western democracies are known for suppressing the upward mobility of developing nations through basing currency exchange rates on the American dollar, while abstracting natural resources from the developing countries. On the one hand, they are telling the developing countries' leaderships, govern well so that you could stabilize your economies and stabilize your currencies. But on the other hand, they create division so that they can actually ensure the superiority of their currencies over all others. Secondly, it's about creating military regimes and staging coup d'etats to ensure unfettered access to mineral resources. In many ways, this is what the fight is about in the Middle East and other developing countries, where Western cartels dominate and wreak havoc with the natural resources in the developing countries. Cartelism is becoming or has become the new order of the day and will continue to do so, controlling access to media and information that precludes exposure to the world about atrocities committed by agents of big capital. American economist, for instance, Jeffrey Sachs, has written and spoken out amply about the contradictions and hypocrisies of Western democracies. They continue to exploit the natural resources of the developing countries and exploit the weaknesses of the leaderships in these developing countries, and in that way maintain this hegemonic control over the world economy. Now, the supremacy of all of this lies in various issues. In religion, there are two major missionary movements which are at loggerheads with each other and continue to hang on to their beliefs that theirs is the only religion to prevail over time. Everybody knows who they are. It's about Christianity and Islam. Now, both of them are missionary religions. They need to dominate, and domination can only come about by conversion. In Christianity, it is especially through Catholicism, through the work of the Vatican, that this belief prevails. In Islam, it is central to the Quran that there is no God but Allah, and that salvation is only possible through adherence of the precepts and principles that emanate from that are set in the Quran. Now, the First Nations or the indigenous populations in most of the countries, particularly the North Americas and South America and in African countries as well. First Nations' reaction against the role of the church in forced conversion and the deaths of inmates in countries like Canada, Poland, and USA have just erupted very recently, no more than a few months ago, with the intention of actually showing up the role of the church in forced conversions and the creation of indigenous populations as second-rated citizens of their countries of origin. And above this, the role of the church in relation to capitalism and the control of their economies. On the other hand, as a competitive force, we have jihad, which is increasingly being viewed as a necessity to spread the word of their last prophet, given to him, as they refer to him as Almighty Allah. Now, Islam generally is about unquestionable submission. In Islam, several commanding factors makes it difficult for jihadists and Islamists to ignore their inscriptions. All those who do not subscribe to the Quran, the teachings of the last prophets, through the Hadith, are doomed to hell after death. That belief still prevails. It's a very simplistic notion. If you are not chosen by God, you will not go to heaven and you will burn in hell forever. Everyone who is not Muslim is tagged by the pejorative terms like non-believers or kafirs. So no matter what you believe in, and no matter how civilized your beliefs are, you remain a non-believer and a kafir. Added to that is that the world should at some point in history be governed by Sharia law. There is this confidence amongst the jihadists and the Islamists that the world will be governed by Sharia law because Islam will triumph in the end. Now, the immediate threat to a country and a civilization such as India is a creation of the British, Pakistan, which is a necessary creation of the British, essentially being a diversionary tactic during the end of the colonial rule in India. British colonialism in India is about the 3 R's: robbing, raping, and ruining the social fabric of infrastructural development in the country. They ruined the social fabric of India by forcing people to pay taxes on their land, even when they were unproductive during times of drought or flooding in India. They displaced people by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. So when we go to India and we see people sleeping in the streets, it is not because out of choice. It is done because people have been displaced and they lost all of their possessions. And this has a history to it. And that history goes back to British rule in the country. In the fight to evict the British from India, the battle to bifurcate the country and create 2 states, one for Muslims and one for Hindus. The creation of Pakistan is essentially a result of yet to be told stories of British-Muslim negotiations for the creation of a Muslim state. And that Muslim state itself was bifurcated as West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which India very cleverly and successfully divided and created or turned East Pakistan into Bangladesh as we know it today. The very naming of the country Pakistan in itself is actually a provocation that goes against the grain of the universalism that Brzezinski was actually talking about, that we could eke out of the civilizations that we know prevails in the world today. Pakistan is actually, when translated, about being the land of the pure. We know, for instance, what impure people really prevail in the administration of that country. A popular war cry and warning to post-independent population of India by Pakistanis thereafter, when the British were actually being removed from India. They did not leave voluntarily. The Indians threw them out. The Pakistanis, having got what they wanted, made the statement, we got Pakistan fighting, we will get India laughing. This quotation was in the book by Lapierre and Collins, From Freedom at Midnight. Now, the last 4 wars between India and Pakistan in 1948, in 1965, 1971, and 1999, we know that they hardly showed the Pakistanis laughing in each of the 4 defeats in each of these wars. They cannot confront India in a conventional war. First of all, they failed when they tried. And secondly, they can no longer afford to fight a war for more than a week if they do challenge India in a conventional war. Now, in order to achieve this kind of situation of universalism, we have to look at issues between religion and science. Against the mindset that is restricted by scriptural injunctions and myopic views and possibilities for universalism and coexistence are actually very substantially reduced when they are myopic and people can't see universal values. Until barely a few hundred years ago, the 16th and 17th centuries, the church's views about the world, for instance, was that it was flat. And it cost iconic thinkers like Galileo Galilei his life, sentenced to death by the Catholic Church. And Nicholas Copernicus had his book banned, but fortunately, he died before he could actually be sentenced to death as well by the Catholic Church for his views. Their books were trying to correct the church's views through scientific evidence, revolves around which they were stating, the earth revolves around the sun. Since the spread of Christianity beyond the boundaries of the East and the Mediterranean, everyone that objected to conversion was labeled as non-believers by the church, very much like their counterparts from the other Abrahamic faiths, particularly Islam. Among Islamists and jihadists, on the other hand, a realization of this constriction is also a recognition towards conversion through persuasion alone. Keeping the ideology alive is supported by acts of terrorism, including forced conversions, increased financial help for entrepreneurialism by Muslims, edging out people of different faiths when entrepreneurialism by Muslims actually dominates in particular enclaves, and attraction of bigger numbers of people of the Muslim faith whenever it is possible. The followers of Sanatana Dharma, on the other hand, made discoveries that Galileo and Copernicus, for instance, only made recently. Whereas scientific thinkers from Bharat made discoveries thousands of years ago that go beyond what Copernicus and Galileo had actually found. What we see in all of this is the hypocrisy of the West and the failure of their universalist ideas. Despite the rapid gains in progressive thinking through increased interest in humanities and social sciences since the 19th century and early 21st century, ideological pursuits around these issues were actually taking us more backwards than forwards. The creation of the United Nations, the progressive constitutions of so many countries, the downward trends and the charters on human rights, minority rights and secularism, contemporary globalization characterized by hegemonic control, political manipulation through control of the masses, and the force that is used, that is dictatorial over how people live and lays claims over natural resources, fossil fuel, as well as other labor requirements. Now, I just go back briefly in history to point out some important aspects about what we are actually facing. Since the 16th century onwards, numerous radical changes took place to replace old ideologies. Catholicism was replaced by Protestantism, substantially reducing the control of the church over the people and its resources. And Mughal domination in India at the same time was actually on a downward spiral. Missionaries, explorers, and colonists began moving out of Western Europe to discover new places, ushering in the beginning of Western colonization from the 16th century onwards. Since the 18th century, medical advances facilitated the increased settlements of populations all over the world, particularly of Europeans. Since the 19th century, the world witnessed a rise in intellectual debates, which we call the Enlightenment period, about how human societies evolved. Social scientists and the humanities contributors to this refer to this as evolutionary theory, the debates that placed Europeans above everyone else. If you notice this language used in the 19th century, as opposed to, for instance, what Brzezinski was talking about. Evolutionary theorism was talking about barbarism first, savagery second, and civilization third. But Europeans had transcended all of these boundaries, according to evolutionary theorists. The early 20th century, however, brought about challenges against the Enlightenment period and the xenophobic tendencies by Europeans. What we saw here was a virtual end of Arabic wars of conversion and against other nations and communism, the rise of communism and the almost near dissipation of capitalism brought about through the 1930s recession. Now, Since the 16th century, after the Portuguese adventurers first landed in Bharat in 1498, European intrusion began to dominate over the Islamic presence in Bharat. By the second half of the 19th century, the need for followers of Sanatana Dharma to assert themselves began manifesting more openly. Looting and the dismembering of the Hindu communities escalated to greater heights, maximized since British presence in 1757 when they first began to colonize India. They left in 1947 after 100 years of raping and robbing and ruining the country. India's first war of independence and the rise of Hindu assertion began in 1857 through the 1857 mutiny against British exploitation in Bharat, which actually constitutes the first war of independence, and it rates, I think, as the first war of independence by any colonized country. By the end of the century, a relatively unknown figure whose stature as a creative thinker against foreign domination was a man by the name of Chandranath Basu, a literature and staunch Hindu and a doyen of economic nationalism, who coined the term Hindutva in 1891. This term was raised by the next generation of revolutionary writers such as Hegde, Hedgewar, Golwalkar, and Savarkar. Now, since the beginning of the 20th century, almost 100 and some odd years ago, entered the RSS and Hindutva in using the concept of Hindutva to raise awareness and consciousness among people of Indian origin. They simultaneously included messages of incorporation, acceptance of all fellow human beings. Notice, very importantly, the message of universalism. India, come Bharat, was not only for Hindus, but for all who lived in it, and every ethnic denomination or whatever religious persuasion they belonged to. Hedgewar was a member of the Congress party and first witnessed firsthand the Hindu-Muslim clashes and considered the Congress attempt at Hindu-Muslim unity to be delusional. He witnessed the Mopla rebellion firsthand. The Mopla rebellion was totally misrepresented by the Congress party as a rebellion against the British and against Hindu landlords. But in actual fact, it was a very cunning ploy, particularly by Islamists, not just against the British, but against Hindus per se, not just Hindu landlords. And despite this, people from the background of Hindutva continued to talk in very accommodationist language. So reawakening Sanatana Dharma to Hindutva became very progressive, and it extended its wings almost across the entire country. Hindutva is based on a philosophy of national culture and envisages the whole of the nation. In Golwalkar's terms, the outlook it offers has room for all minorities on condition of the wholehearted support of the supreme value of the nation in their lives. The nation is the vehicle of universalism, not an entity above them. There is no chauvinist nationalism and the kind of associated inklings of Hitler in the recent Western wars that the Europeans have fought. Now, in order to instill the spirit of self-restraint, the concept that they've introduced were very important. Dharma, Atma, Artha, and Karma. Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. All based on individualist attempts to ensure that they control themselves and discipline themselves in order to live as examples to others. And that becomes the basis of Sanatana Dharma's message to to its followers. Live the life that you want others to follow. So, Golwalkars had tremendous messages. Any arrangement that tries to remove the inherent disparities altogether is based on superficial equality is bound to fail. And he did a very beautiful assessment of socialism, of capitalism, of Islam, and of Christianity. It is ranks for me as an academic amongst the most concise and convincing assessments of the major ideologies in the world today. All of them, Christianity, Islam, capitalism, and socialism, lack that kind of universalism and all-embracing attitude that Sanatana Dharma actually holds. Communism too, as he said, has completely failed to realize any of its declared concepts. And in this way, according to communism, they failed hopelessly. It only lasted about 50 years after the Second World War, and its collapse is unlikely to see its resurgence anytime either in the near or long-term future. What we see in the longer term here is that one of the major inventions of the Indus Valley civilization thousands of years ago was a science of metallurgy. Yet to date, archaeologists have found no evidence of metal equipment used for wars and destructions of other settlements. Evidence shows that metal was used for peaceful purposes only. To date, many people tend to think that the Mohenjo-daro and Harappa civilizations go back 5,000 years. More recent evidence has shown that, in fact, whatever of the artifacts that they have discovered goes back of another 2,000 years. So that goes back up to 7,000 years to date. None of the archaeological artifacts that they have uncovered so far shows any issues of destruction, either to neighboring communities or within their own. It is not just tolerance of others' rights to reach or realize the ultimate truth in ways that they know best, but it is about acceptance of that right. And it goes back to these early civilizations, to the scriptures that guide us in Sanatana Dharma, and the right, recognizing the right of others to experience their own chosen paths towards realizing God. To this extent, Savarkar's declaration was very convincing. Hinduism is only a part of Hindutva, which is realistically about a renaissance and a national awakening. But what Indic civilization has to offer to the world, this has been amply captured by Swami Vivekananda on what he refers to as the land of the Aryans. There's a lot to be said here. This is the gist of all worship, to be understood by all others in the world. Hindutva, and what Swami Vivekananda has to disseminate in his writings, is of tremendous significance. It emanates from a very important verse in the Yajur Veda, which goes back, one of my colleagues having written on this, Professor Dev Tiwari, dates the Vedas going back to at least 18,000 years. And I would end with this. Lord of light and power, strengthen us for a place of honor and respect. May all the living beings, notice, may all the living beings, not just Hindus, not people of any particular religion, but all living beings, view me with the eye of a friend. May I equally look at all living beings too with the eye of a friend. May we all view each other with friendly eyes of love and understanding. This verse from the Yajur Veda resonates with this very popular mantra that many of us are already familiar with, the Gayatri Mantra, where we talk about worshipping all and seeing all and everything in this world as a projection of the super consciousness. This is what universalism through Hindu or Sanatana Dharma projects. And this is the only route that will be able to achieve that intercivilizational message that Brzezinski tries to understand to what he was saying about universalism. Unless people like Brzezinski and all other foreign ministers read the Vedas, we will never be able to achieve that sense of universalism. And this is what will ensure that Hinduism will need to use these kinds of mantras in order to survive. And it will overlook and overshadow all others in time to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Anand, for that insightful view into why Indic civilizations will survive such terror. I've been jotting down some of the words you have used, such as PO. It reminds me a bit about Hitler, non-believers, doomed to hell, infidels, human preclusion, and so on. These are the words you've used in your presentation. And then you've quoted from ancient Indic thought. And I've written down this paragraph, this part of this phrase here: may we all view each other with friendly eyes, love and understanding. Now, I would like to add to that from a quote from Leo Tolstoy. There's something in the human spirit that will survive and prevail. There's a tiny and brilliant light burning in the heart of man that will not go out no matter how dark the world becomes. Also, I'd like to quote Mahatma Gandhi: humanity is an ocean. If a few drops of the ocean are dirty, the ocean does not become dirty. Now, for the human species simply to exist, I quote the Dalai Lama: love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. Perhaps we all need to realize that any civilization, or humane philosophy for that matter, balancing man, nature, and the entire existence is the only means for universal balance. Today, many in the world are observing 26/11, the Mumbai terror attack, by lighting lamps and candles to commemorate this event. Now, our program today emphasizes the memory of this event. And to you, our viewers, please raise your questions on Facebook as we now invite our speakers to join in our panel session. Now, thank you both, Professor Anand and Arindam, for your insightful presentations. From the perspective of Indians in Africa, I have a few questions. So let me start with you first, Professor Singh. I have some statistics here to look at. From Combating Terrorism Center, that is the document, September 2021, volume 14, issue 7, and I quote: in 2020, over 13,000 people were killed in nearly 5,000 acts of violence. 17 foreign terrorist organizations affected at least 22 countries. Now, these statistics reflect the current state of jihadism in Africa. The continent, I'm referring to the African continent, seems to be emerging as the new center of gravity for jihadism. So, Professor Anand, is terrorism now on our doorstep?
It already is, of course. The fact that it prevails to the extent that it does in Mozambique and the border of Tanzania in itself is an indication of how close it is to us. But these forms of terrorism have a lifespan of their own. They come and go. No matter how scriptural they might be, no matter what sources they may refer to, they do not have a long-lasting lifespan. And as much as it is on our doorstep, the possibility is also there that they would be that it would dissipate before it actually reaches the South African border. That should not keep us in a state of placidness and submission to the fact that things will set itself right. We've got to continue to remain vigilant and ensure that this situation does not creep into the country in a way that will disrupt our lives. So hopefully our defense force does not play the very placid role that it played on July 8th when they weren't able to avail themselves to the unrest that took place here in KwaZulu-Natal.
Thank you, Professor. Question to Mr. Mukherjee. Now, Africa has significant marginalized, poor and neglected communities. It seems that these jihadist insurgencies are thriving in such places. Youth unemployment is said to be the main cause for locals to be easily attracted by radical movements, promoting that this form of Islam will act as an antidote, perhaps, to the existing corrupt elite rule that they face. Do these terrorists offer some measure of order, or is this just some of brutal Sharia law? Arindam?
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Wait, let me just increase the volume a little bit. Okay. See, Lux, there's always a vacuum where there is a new idea like political Islam or a political ideology, anything which is which has in its mind kind of a universalist sort of an idea, and it wants to expand. There's always a vacuum where it finds a space and then it starts expanding. You know, failed states are a reason. So when we talk about Africa and significant chunk of Asia, we're talking about failed state where, you know, the states have failed in law and order. The states have failed because of the economic policy, and even soft states like India. Right. Today I was watching Sangsad TV, which was talking about the fact that 93 Bombay blasts happened because of the lack of water patrolling, the lack of the coastal patrolling agencies. The bombs and the parts of the bombs were brought in by the sea route. The same thing happens in 2008, where, you know, guys start sailing from Karachi and they reach India. It's the same lack of agility and lack of alertness on the part of the coastal guards and the coastal. And today it's been 13 years, and we don't know the kind of network they had to have in India for them to execute such an attack. And this came in Sangsad TV. Those of you who want to go for a YouTube search can do a Sangsad TV Perspective 2611, and you can find that out. That is where they have discussed this. So soft state are a reason, failed state are a reason. Now, it is true that many nations, when I talk about soft and failed states, I mean that there are many nations outside the West that have not been very successful in modernizing in their societies. So, as I said, that forget Islamic nations, even India has not had a cellular level of industrialization. We are still largely an agrarian society, and we are a curious mix of agricultural society and post-industrial society. Industrialization has not reached us. We have not had an organic growth. So to Islamic societies, to the devout ones from the pastoral nomadic societies, then for that reason, whenever they see some kind of a, what shall I put it? In their mind, if there's some kind of an imbalance, this is always a call for a return to the glorious past. So this is Shah Waliullah, theory of distance, multiplied across a large chunk of Muslim world. And then if you believe in Sharia, if you believe in the bigger idea, then you are an accessory to Sharia, you're a constituent of Sharia. Then Sharia is not brutal to you anymore then. As far as the Muslims of European Union, as far as the Muslims of USA is concerned, they are a post-industrial society, which these guys have gone into. They haven't actually grown into it organically. So the absence of bigger idea is there. So if somebody to a born-again Muslim rallying for a brotherhood is a proposed antidote for nihilism. So that means you're actively supporting a state of existence like that, which means it is not brutal to you anymore. You are a part of it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Arindam. Back to you, Professor Singh. I want to ask you a question about South Africa itself, since you are South African. We have here in South Africa, Jamiat Ulama. They are concerned with the welfare of the Muslim community in South Africa, but they've also released a statement in support of the Taliban. Now, you know, yet in Afghanistan, we have witnessed mass murders, women getting killed in soccer fields for not wearing hijab, and other heinous acts. Is this just propaganda? How does South Africa as a country respond to such support for extreme outfits? Professor?
Well, the one thing about the constitutionalism in South Africa is that it allows you freedom of and freedom of speech. The fact that they support the Taliban is a matter of personal choice. People tend to very easily get emotionally caught in situations where the relative success of somebody from within their ranks or ethnic group is seen as a form of spiritual endorsement for themselves. You know, very recently, when India played Pakistan in the opening match T20 World Cup, Pakistan defeated India. And one of the ministers in the Imran Khan government said this was a success of Islam. You know, how much more immature can somebody get? But the fact that they support the Taliban gives them the right to do so. But on the other hand, the Taliban is not going to last very long in Afghanistan. It is the hotbed of the interfactionalism, fighting and warring among different segments within Islam. It is in a state of chaos at the moment. I am not criticizing Islam as a religion, but the different segments within Islam are at such loggerheads with each other that they will just drag themselves down. There's no doubt about it. So supporting the Taliban right now is their right on the one hand, but it is also a very short-sighted measure, especially when you take that publicly, without understanding the dynamics of this factionalism that exists among Muslims.
Thank you, Professor Anand. Now, let's look at the regions. There's a question to you, Arindam. Those regions that historically served as central locations of violence, like you mentioned in your presentation, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Iran, whatever it is. Now, given the recent Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, what is happening to the people in Afghanistan? And can we expect that the Afghanistan-Pakistan region has a dangerous potential to become another powerful hub for terrorist organizations? Arindam?
Yes, Lux, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, right, increase the volume. Okay, Afghanistan is a very interesting and a very diverse topic. It will take a lot of time to answer that question. Afghanistan is a dangerous hub. It never ceased to be a dangerous hub. Okay, there is a great amount of fantasy amongst a lot of writers when they call Afghanistan a graveyard of the empires and so on and so forth. I personally look at Afghanistan as the dump yard of the great game. You know, Afghanistan was a country that was born out of negligence. Soviet Union, when they took over Merv, when they took over Krasnovodsk, when they came down to Gyoktepe, they decided that this is going to be our southern border. Okay. Akbar's frontiers policy, which sort of saw him build a fort in Attock and put in artillery guns in the Turkhan Pass, became British frontier policy, which went on to become Pakistan's frontier line. Persia was never interested. They were interested, well, like when Persian Shah was there, he was interested to influence Kamran Shah, but he was not interested to walk in before on that. But more than that, then on the northwestern side, you have Hindu Kush mountain and you have vast wasteland. So Afghanistan came into being because the bigger powers that were there suddenly were not interested in Afghanistan anymore. It is a land that they wanted to forget. So that's how it was a land which was neglected. And after the initial Anglo-Rus rivalry sort of settled down, the Great Game, there's a great book by Peter Hopkirk. It's called The Great Game. If you want, you can read it. From 17th century onwards, when Russian expansion, Tsarist Russian expansion started, and suddenly the English India woke up, the Raj woke up, and they had to stem that kind of an expansion. They lost it pretty bad, and Afghanistan sort of became the buffer land. So boundaries were sort of drawn in avoidance. Now, what happens is, what happened post, let's say, during at the end of 1990, when Cold War ended, Russia had lost. West suddenly had this renewed interest in Central Asian gas. Turkmenistan is probably the third or the fourth largest gas manufacturing country in the world. Now, there was one way to bring Turkmen gas out into the open sea, which was via Afghanistan. So West's renewed interest in Afghanistan happened after that. That is why, despite not recognizing the Taliban as a government, which was only recognized by UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, United States did not have a problem in taking the Taliban leadership and whining and dining them in Texas because they wanted an access to Turkmenistan. So the interest has always been, self-driven. The interest has always been self-motivated. All in all, the Russians had taken Afghanistan for 10 years. West stayed in Afghanistan for a really long time, 20 years. I don't know how much, I don't remember exactly how many years they stayed. Nobody was interested in building Afghanistan as a nation. They were all of them were interested in building the state of Afghanistan, which is essentially the government of Afghanistan. No one was interested in building the state. So Afghanistan still remains a very pre-industrial, a nomadic society. The vegetation in Afghanistan is very less. The forest cover is very less. Agricultural land is very less. If you look at the map of Afghanistan, from the northeast, you have Hindu Kush sort of barging in and then breaking into three parts. So the entire center of Afghanistan is absolute, mountainous and high mountain with no vegetation. The passes that are there, they act as a choke point. The people are very tribal. They're very primitive, very tribal people. We hear a lot about Afghanistan mineral, but there is no one point of concentration where you would find a cobalt or a tungsten or whatever. They are scattered all around. So building one railway line from, let's say, a Kabul to a Pakistan, or from a Kandahar to a Iran is not going to solve your purpose. So despite Soviet Union staying there for such long time, USA trying there for such long time, and now hopefully China will be trying, Afghanistan mineral is not a good economic proposal. So we are looking at a land which has been neglected. We are looking at a geography which is pretty much impossible to tame. We are looking at a set of people who are very primitive, very pre-industrial in their mindset. So the fact that Afghanistan is destined to remain like this for a long period of time, at least for the next 40, 50 years, is a done deal. I don't see it changing. And whatever extremist Islam or whatever jihadism or whatever terrorism you say can emanate from Afghanistan, Pakistan is going to make sure that it does, because it has got a agenda, it has got a tactics of playing with fire, basically.
Thank you, Arindam. Professor Anand, back to you again. And I received a question from Facebook, from our viewers. They've put on site that there's a page called Daily Maverick, which states that the Islamic State's insurgents could target South Africa. And this is a warning by President Ramaphosa during the Pretoria conference with Kenya's Kenyatta. Can you, advise us more in terms of what is this Islamic State, or IS, that we are being warned about in South Africa? Professor?
The that we've noticed about the ways in which the Islamic State operates, particularly outside of the Middle East, is that the attacks that they engage in are very individualistic. They no longer engage in guerrilla type groups, and outside of countries like Libya, Syria, Iraq, and other places, they don't engage in conventional styles of warring, where armies literally face each other and bomb each other out until someone is the victor. They reduced their style of attack to the unknown, unexpected individuals who are fully laced and laden with whatever explosives they can carry to effect maximum damage in particular crowded locations. That is something that is very possible in South Africa. It's happened in Kenya. It's already happening in the Mozambique-Tanzanian border. And the possibilities of that, well, it's already happened in South Africa as well, not too far away from us here in Durban. But it was brought under control within a very short space of time. People have been arrested. One can never be too vigilant under these circumstances, I'm afraid, and until it actually starts happening, we would never know how to prioritize and defend ourselves against such attacks, because people are very unassuming when they engage in these kind of lone wolf attacks against unexpected population groups and crowded places. So he can warn us about it. We need to be vigilant about it as well. The population in South Africa needs to be vigilant, but until it actually happens, we're not going to be able to know how exactly we need to protect ourselves against these people. It's a very clever strategy on the one hand, but it's not an easy one to monitor. That's why they started engaging in these lone wolf attacks. It's very, very difficult to monitor.
All right, then. Professor, let me just add on to that. You know, normally we see the fact that we tend to understand that terrorism is against people of a country or civilians, but there's also incidences of terrorist organizations against each other. Now, I'm going to quote something here that I've found is based on Zen and Clark 2020, most of the violence in the Sahel region. Now, the Sahel region is there in Northern Africa. It's a piece in the northern part, close to the Sahara Desert. Now, this is the conflict between ISGS, the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, and JNIM, an Al-Qaeda affiliate, and I will try to say this, Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal Muslimin. Now, that is one example. Now, let's take a second example. In the Horn of Africa, we also have the Al-Qaeda affiliated Al-Shabaab and the Islamic State in Somalia. So these are two separate organizations, ISIS and the Al-Shabaab. Now, they're fighting between themselves to become the dominant jihadist group. Now, these open hostilities are against one another, and obviously the civilians are paying the price as usual, even though the organizations are fighting with themselves. Now, it seems that the interpretation of religion has changed in recent decades, and this has come through in some of your presentations as well, and that the more tolerant form of Islam has been displaced by more radical, Salafist, Wahhabi interpretations from what I've been understanding. Now, please explain why the concept of religion of peace, because all these religions are religions of peace. Why is this concept of religion of peace not followed between these organizations themselves? Professor?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, Islam does not mean peace. Islam means uncritical, unchallenged submission to Allah. And more than 60% of the Quran, as research has shown, is dedicated towards attacking and converting the kafir. Now, in a situation such as that, where you have to abide by inscriptions that motivate you to convert and to destroy, you have to abide by those, because you have to abide by what Islam actually means, and that is submission. So there's never been a tolerant version of Islam, not that I know of. But Muslims as human beings have been generally wonderful people. They want to coexist and they want to live with people in ways that can render their relationships as productive as they possibly can. But when it comes to certain radical elements who want to put a literal translation to what the Quran says, then they have to abide by it. There isn't anything that is moderate about the Quran. The truth of the matter is, it depicts a certain philosophy, and according to the Quran, Muslims will defeat the entire world and Islam will prevail. So that's what all of them are fighting for, even if they are not in any way at war with anyone. But by and large, it becomes an issue that they are all working towards. Research in Hungary has shown in one of the, in Hungary, or is it in Finland? One of the research institutes in Finland have shown that the moment Muslims gather in a particular place and they reach a point of 15%, that's when demands of a very special nature are made. And then their numbers grow exorbitantly. Now, once those numbers grow, then demands upon the economy and the polity are made in ways that give them special privileges, all based on what they believe the Quran requires them to be entitled to, irrespective of how insignificant a minority they might be. So it's a difficult one. Some people want to say that Islam means peace, but the real meaning is submission.
Understood. All right, thank you, Prof. Let's go to you, Arindam. Now, according to some research here in South Africa, and I'm quoting from Hussein Solomon of the University of Free State in South Africa, Saudi Arabia has contributed to build hundreds of mosques across Africa in which the radical Salafist interpretation is preached. Now, it seems like religious terrorists, it seems like African terrorists are using religious terminologies to justify the use of violence against its enemies. And these enemies they consider as government, political parties, maybe they have personal agendas, Western churches, schools, hospitals, and so forth. We see them being destroyed. And, does this merely exacerbate existing ethnic and resource conflicts? What is your view?
See, Lux, my view is pretty black and white that way. See, this radical Islamists have as I've already shared in my presentation, they have a very medieval view of the world, which is sort of pre-industrial in nature. So they have a very medieval view of the industrial and the post-industrial people and societies and ideologies. And what they're doing is they're trying to do a significant damage to the weak states, as I've discussed before. Okay, taking that cue from Professor Singh, where the populations grow by a certain percentage, there is a spurt of radical Islamism. And if I go back to the 1990 to the 2010 era, where jihad actually liquefied, where the significant movement went underground and institutions sort of officially detached themselves from the outfit, and the money went underground and private sponsorship started coming in, and anybody could go and hit any target that they wanted. That was a kind of a time when this liquefaction happened. Now, by its nature, like medieval Christianity, which was a transnational kind of an order before the separation of church and state took place, or like modern globalization, which is again a transnational order, which is an industrial, post-industrial transnational order, Islam too is transnational. They don't go by the political boundaries of nations. And nation state is a very Westphalian concept. Okay, so now if I consider your question, what your question could very well point out to the fact that this could be a three-way conflict between Westphalia at one end, techno-feudalism, which is sort of which is sort of taken over from globalization at one end, and Islam. So we are looking at a pre-industrial transnational order. We are looking at an industrial transnational order, which is Westphalia, nation state order, and we are looking at tech feudalism, which is a post-industrial transnational order. And this could be a three-way conflict, and the weak states are going to be hit. So when it comes to that, big tech might find, and they might have found an ally in Islam. Islam and communism have sort of been allies before, as long as their mutual goals matched. And once that was done, they sort of took to killing each other. Communists have thoroughly been decimated in Pakistan, in Iran, so on and so forth. And the same way Soviet Union prevailed in Central Asia. So frankly speaking, I have at this point in time, looking at the sport of radicalism, I have no idea whether the nation state order has the bandwidth, has the wherewithal to counter. Because frankly speaking, all nation states haven't been equally good. There has been, this concept of nation states finds a lot of countries that are not good torchbearers of the idea. Okay, and they are going to be the ones that are not the good torchbearer of the ideas, stand the major chance of falling to one of this bigger universal power, whether it's tech feudalism, whether it's Islam, I don't know. So that's how I look at it. It's a three-way conflict which is right now taking place in this world.
Thanks, Arindam. I want to continue with yourself on another question I want to explore. You know, these terrorist organizations, they acquire a substantial number of weapons, bombs, vehicles, communication equipment. And now if we look at, for example, Boko Haram, they thrived on the kidnap for ransom. Now, kidnap for ransom industry, which involved women and children, and also the narcotics industry, particularly opium and so forth. Now, politicians and businessmen, particularly in Nigeria, also offer Boko Haram protection money. They offer money to the organization for their survival, essentially. Now, likewise, Al-Shabaab, it acquired funding through piracy, kidnapping, extortion, and that's on the western side, whilst Boko Haram is on the western side, whilst Al-Shabaab is on the eastern side. Now, all of them seem to be involved in this piracy, kidnapping, extortion, smuggling. Now, how can these organizations justify such activities in the name of religion when these are illegal activities? Arindam?
Okay, now there are two parts to this question. The first part is to answer directly what you've said. See, when you are talking about piracy and extortion and kidnapping and all, this are like sort of undermining the prevalent authority, which is again the law and order set by a nation state, which is again the law and order set by a country which follows a Westphalian order. Now, if I don't believe in that, if I am a medieval order, I don't believe in whatever orders you have set, then nothing for me that you have set is legit. Okay, so since that is essentially a nation state, then that becomes irrelevant to me. So the kidnapping and the violence that happens. The second part of the question is, there is a wonderful book written by Aisha Ahmed, which is called Jihad and Company, Black Market and Islamist Power. She's done extensive research in Africa, on Africa and Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the central point of the book is that, whenever a society becomes unstable, whenever there's a civil war going on, like the civil war that is going on in North Africa, in that question that you asked, Professor Singh. So whenever civil war is going on and a society becomes unstable, especially in African and Asian countries, the merchant class has been found to quickly align itself with the local warlords. That provides a lot of stability. This is the research of the book. Now, what she says, what Aisha Ahmed says is that the central arguments is because of two. One is because of higher trust, and number two is because of lower cost. So civil war essentially is a very low trust environment. Because it is low trust, the cost goes up. The protection money goes up. So if there are 17 warring factions fighting in between them and your truck has to pass through 17 checkpoints, you have to pay to each of these people. So the cost goes up. Now, the moment something like an Islam comes in, it provides a blanket social capital. So suddenly you don't have to pay all those 17 checkpoints. You pay to one checkpoint. So your cost goes down. So the modern merchant class, what they try to change their identity to keep the profit up. And this identity reconstruction sort of overrides modern nationalism. So now if I'm sitting in an Afghanistan, which is war-torn, I am probably not going to identify myself as an Afghan national. I would probably try to identify myself as a Taliban, because that gives me a blanket protection that lowers my risk, that lowers my cost. So a sort of a proto-state with blanket Islamic identity thus this is Aisha Ahmed's argument, has the ability to sort of bring down the taxes, because smaller factions mean the taxes go down naturally. The other side of the story is the other guys that you're fighting, if they're too fragmented, they are forced to raise their cost. And then they sort of lose out. So the main competition that happens then is economic. And business class aligning themselves with Islamist means the rest of the identified region quickly falls into the tilt. So at that point in time, when you've suddenly morphed into a kind of a state where the nationalism is not the order, where identity is based on religion, along religion lines, then none of these sort of apply. And then the guys that have identified themselves with the prevalent power sort of see all the kidnappings and extortion stop. So that's how it works out. I would suggest a read of the book if you're interested, if anybody of them amongst the viewers is interested.
Thanks, Arindam. Now, there's quite a few other questions coming in on Facebook, but we are unfortunately running short of time. So, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for your efforts. We can definitely continue at a very great length speaking on this topic, but I believe we have exhaustively analyzed and you have presented significant information in your slides and so forth, which, I believe this information is quite overwhelming even to myself. So I would like to express my sincere thanks and gratitude for your participation and efforts, and a very special thanks to Indians in Africa for allowing me to be the host of this event, and not forgetting those that have been supporting us in the background, our moderators and technical support team, and apologies from our side for any technical errors or issues. This is an online platform and it's delivered over the internet. Now, in ending, as a South African, I would like to quote an icon, President Nelson Mandela: "To deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity." Now, as today is 26/11, I would like to now play out with a positive message from the child survivor of the Mumbai terror attack, who he was at the age of 2, had both of his parents killed at Nariman House in Mumbai. Now, this is a message of goodwill that he gives to the people of India. And given that this message is from such a young lad, it should also resound to all of humanity as a message of hope for the rest of the world. Thank you and goodbye. Technical.
I think the technician needs to unmute.
The video is being rendered on Facebook with audio.
Excellent. Thank you.
I hope the session is ended. We can stop the recording.